Welcome guys and girls. Today we are going to go over some of the popular cloud interview questions, including the new GenAI ones. More importantly, I'm going to go over some of the average answer that I hear from candidates all the time, as well as some of the real world good answers. If you give answers like that, you will set yourself apart from others and will increase your chance of getting the job significantly. The questions we are going to cover today are: what are the differences between SQL and NoSQL? What is RAG in GenAI? What are some GenAI use cases? What is the difference between CICD and GitOps? What is RTO and RPO? Tell me a microservices design in AWS. How do you pick one service versus another as a solutions architect? What is your favorite AWS service? How will you improve it further? What is AWS Service X? For those of you who are new to the channel, my name is Raj. I'm currently a principal specialist solutions architect working at AWS. Before joining AWS, I was a distinguished cloud architect at Verizon. Before that, I was a mainframer at JP Chase. So I worked in mainframe for over 10 years and able to switch my career. I have delivered critical real-world projects which became official AWS references, but more importantly, I have mentored students who got into top companies. They came from legacy technology as well, but now I have helped them got into AWS, Google, JP Chase, Reddit, Citibank, and more. And they followed the same framework that I'm going to teach you today. Okay, let's get started. Super popular question, difference between SQL and NoSQL, and most of you think you answered it correctly. The answer I hear a lot is SQL holds structured data and NoSQL handles semi-structured and unstructured data. SQL needs a schema, NoSQL is schemaless. Is this answer correct? Yes, but this is bare minimum. Why is it average or why is it bad? SQL and NoSQL has been out for a long time. So at this point, interviewer expects more. What the interviewer is looking for is how this impacts different design factors and how you will choose one versus the other. Keep in mind, as a solutions architect, you will be responsible for talking to the application team and coming up with appropriate databases. So you need to go beyond just these two factors. A good answer, of course, you have to say those points, they will start there, but then you have to also talk about SQL databases need to scale vertically for the writer instances, and NoSQL databases scale horizontally. SQL databases support complex queries and joins. NoSQL databases do not support complex queries and joins. SQL generally follows ACID properties and NoSQL follows CAP theorem. NoSQL database is inherently highly available, but in SQL, you are responsible for that part. Even better, add any personal experience if you have. For example, at company X, during a release of a very popular product, we chose DynamoDB to hold the information and the price of that product, which handled 10 times the regular traffic without latency or scale issues. See how this is different than the average answers? This answer shows the theoretical difference, of course, but then you also know the design properties, the scalability, high availability, and how SQL and NoSQL impacts each of those, along with your practical experience. Now, GenAI is super popular, and even in general solutions architect interviews, you are expected to know the fundamentals of GenAI. So RAG is one of those concepts. So one question is, what is RAG in GenAI? So you may say, RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. It is a technique where a language model retrieves relevant information from external sources before generating a response. This helps the model provide more accurate answers, especially when it has not been trained on the latest data. Is this correct answer? Yes, but it's an average answer, right? Because everyone will say this. Why is it average? The basics are correct, but it does not show the knowledge as solutions architect. It doesn't go a little bit deeper. It doesn't talk about the actual use cases. An actual good answer will explain what does RAG mean. And I'm just showing a design to explain it. Of course, in a verbal interview, you won't be able to draw a design, but it's a good one to keep in your back pocket in case this comes in your system design round as well. So you could say RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. So the flow is like this. You, the user, can ask a question to the large language model. But instead of sending the question directly to the large language model, we are going to augment that with additional context. Let's say you are an automotive company and the user is asking about the latest model for 2026, which is not in large language model yet. So the organization will get the information about the latest model and then using another embedding model, convert them to vectors or embeddings and save them into a knowledge base such as Amazon OpenSearch or Amazon Kendra. When a customer asks a question, a code or a notebook will go to this vector database where these embeddings are stored and search for any relevant context. If it is found, it will grab all those additional information and then it will augment the question with the additional context and then send it to another large language model. All these large language models and knowledge bases can be stored in example Amazon service such as Amazon Bedrock. After getting this question with the context, large language model will generate an appropriate answer and send it to the user. Because of this whole operation, retrieving relevant information, augmenting that information in the context, as well as generating the final answer is where the name RAG comes in with. Some of the popular use cases of RAG are chatbot or question answer based systems where up-to-date information is important. Notice how I'm demonstrating my thought process as a solutions architect and not just giving a theoretical question answer. Next one, what are some GenAI use cases? Average answer, chatbots, ChatGPT, GenAI coding. Why are they average? These are outdated. If I asked you this question like a 1 year back and you gave me these answers, they would have been a great answer. But at this point, everyone knows about chatbot, ChatGPT, GenAI coding assistants like Amazon Q Developer or Copilot, etc. This has no association with enterprise use cases and it's missing latest enhancements. Okay, so how would a good answer look like? A good answer would look like GenAI use cases can be divided into 3 broad categories: enhancing customer experience, improving productivity, and some of the latest cutting-edge use cases. How do I enhance customer experience with GenAI? Chatbots and virtual assistants, even agentic assistants, where the customers chats with the agent and the agent using latest technology like RAG, knowledge group, gather relevant information, even take actions. There have been a lot of enhancements in improving the productivity. For example, GenAI can generate content. If your enterprise has a lot of reports and you want to summarize them or generate new report from them, GenAI could be used for that. Another use case in this area that's emerging is you ask GenAI to create a matrix in natural language and GenAI will create the analysis including the metrics and dashboard for you. One such example is Amazon Q with QuickSight. And also one of the very popular GenAI use case is doing the coding to assist developer increasing productivity by 10x or more. And finally, there are some cutting edge use cases that I have been playing with and have been super fun. So for example, SRE activities with MCP or Model Context Protocol. For example, I work extensively with Kubernetes cluster. I actually use the Kubernetes MCP server to troubleshoot and fix some of the errors in Kubernetes. By the way, I have a separate video along with demo. I'm gonna give the link up top, so feel free to go check it out. There are many different MCP servers available, not just for Kubernetes, but for coding, cost analysis, best practices, etc. They can all be used for debugging purposes, and I also analyzed my AWS cost using AWS Cost Analysis Server and optimized my cost. See how this is different? It shows that you understand the different use cases of GenAI as well as the different distinct areas, and it connects it to the enterprise use cases that your interviewer cares about. If you want to go one level deeper and get personally trained by me, like hundreds of my students, and crack top tech jobs such as AWS, Microsoft, Google, Reddit, JP Morgan, Citi, check out sabootcamp.com. I run few cohorts with selected students throughout the year. If interested, waitlist there, and when the next cohort opens up, you will get notified. Next question, what is the difference between traditional CI/CD and GitOps? I'm going to go over some of the bad answer traits. No clear understanding of CI and CD. Most of the candidates just club them together. But remember, CI and CD are different phases, and within each CI and CD, there are multiple steps. Just Google it or look up for my other videos on CI/CD. You have to remember each phase of CI and CD and what belongs to what. And this is another mistake that candidates do. CI/CD is not fully replaced by GitOps. Only the CD part is replaced by GitOps. But a lot of times candidates say, yes, I have replaced the CI/CD with GitOps, which is the wrong answer. Now, a good answer will use an actual use case, right? Because anytime you use an use case, number one, it's easier to explain. Number two, it changes you from a theoretical, memorized answer candidate to someone who has actually worked in this technology. Now, of course, GitOps is related to Kubernetes container use cases. So I'll go real quick. So in traditional CI/CD with containers, the flow will look like this. You will check in the code, Docker file, and some of the manifests into a Git repository, and that will trigger some CI tools such as Jenkins or Code Builder, etc. that will take all this code and Docker file and create the container image. Then the CD tool will get triggered, and this CD tool will go and update the Kubernetes manifest, such as deployment manifest, with the new container image tag. So when this container is created, it will have an updated tag, like a release version or something. And then this CD tool will go and update this manifest and point it to this new container image using this new tag. As soon as this manifest file is changed, the CD tool, such as Jenkins, will deploy this manifest file to a Kubernetes cluster, possibly running in Amazon EKS. And then, as soon as this new YAML is deployed, that will bring the container image to your Kubernetes cluster. Now, this is the important part. Even with GitOps, the CI part stays the same. So this is the CI part, right? So when the user checks in the code and etc. to the container image creation. The part that changes is the CD part. So even here, a CD tool will go and update the manifest with the container image tag. However, in the traditional CI/CD, the CD tool is pushing the file into this Amazon EKS. And the push-pull is from the perspective of the Kubernetes cluster. So the Jenkins or some other tool is pushing the file. With GitOps, a GitOps tool is installed in the cluster. And it constantly reconciles between the version that's running in the cluster versus the one that's in the Git. That's why the name GitOps is there, right? Git becomes the single source of truth. As soon as the file in the Git is changed, this Argo CD, which is the most popular GitOps tool right now, grabs this YAML file and brings it to the Kubernetes cluster. And as soon as this file is brought in, so in the CD, you will have a desired state, which is defined in this manifest, and the current state or running state, which is actually running. As soon as these two are different, a controller will deploy this container image. Because remember, this manifest file has the updated tag. So then the container image will come in and get deployed into this Amazon EKS. So also study some of the advantages of GitOps. I have a separate video. I will give the link up top. I don't know how many links YouTube will let me give in the up top, but I'll try to give it. Next one. What is RTO and RPO? Average answer is RTO stands for recovery time objective, and RPO stands for recovery point objective. RTO signifies how much time an application can be down in case of a disaster, and RPO measures how much data can you lose in case of disaster. Why this is an average answer? This is very vague and high level answer. Now, this is where most people make a mistake. Most people mess with unit of measurement. They give a wrong answer here. They say RTO is measured in time because it's recovery time objective, right? And RPO stands for recovery point, and then it measures how much data. And they say RPO is measured in unit of data like megabyte, gigabyte, petabyte, etc., which is wrong. In some cases, candidates try to avoid it and don't go to it. But as an interviewer, we know this comes up in our actual conversations with customer. So you cannot wait for me to ask you this. You have to show interviewer that you know this, okay? And always think the question behind the question. You are a solutions architect, right? Why is RTO and RPO important? So that's what is covered in the good answer. Good answer, you could say, RTO stands for recovery time objective and RPO stands for recovery point objective. RTO signifies the maximum acceptable time it should take to restore the application after a disaster or disruption. And RPO measured maximum acceptable amount of data loss after the failure. Both RTO and RPO are measured in time. Even RPO is measured in time. What does that mean? How is it measured in time? So let's say you took a backup at 1 p.m. and you take backup every 1 hour. So let's say you took a backup at 1 p.m. and before the next backup happens, after 1 hour, the system goes down. So at this point, you can only restore up to the last backup, right? Which is at 1 o'clock. So you will lose up to 1 hour of data max. Whereas, let's say you take backup every 10 minutes. So 1 o'clock, 1:10, 1:20, 30, 40, 50. Okay. So even if the application goes down at 1:59:59, maximum amount of data you could lose is 10 minutes worth, right? Because you took a backup at 1:50. So that's how RPO is also measured in time. So if you want to reduce RPO, take frequent backups. And if you want to eliminate RPO, what does that mean? That means you just have to do real-time replication of your data. Why is RTO and RPO important? Based on RTO and RPO, we can select one of the 4 AWS disaster recovery strategies. See, question behind the question. So there is a good graph. You can Google it, RTO, RPO, disaster recovery. This will come up. It will say there are the 4 disaster recovery strategies: backup and restore, pilot light, warm standby, multi-site active-active. Backup and restore has the highest RTO, RPO, but lowest cost. Multi-site active-active has the lowest RPO, RTO, almost real time, but the highest cost. You should study up one of the DR strategies in a little bit more depth, because another popular interview follow-up question is, can you explain to me one of the disaster recovery strategies that you are familiar with? My favorite is multi-site active-active because it shows your knowledge in multiple areas, knowledge in networking, compute, database, etc. But as long as you study one in depth, you should be okay. Okay, next one. Hey, Mr. Candidate, can you design a microservice in AWS, or can you tell me a microservice design? Average answer is, I will use application load balancer with EC2, or application load balancer with EKS, or API gateway with Lambda. Why is this average? You have to explain how the design actually works. Remember, you are in a solutions architect interview, okay? You have to showcase that you know how the design works, not just ALB with EC2, with auto-scaling group, etc., right? The question is, how will you design a microservice, okay? Or tell me about a microservice design. So you have to highlight microservice characteristics in the design. Okay, so a good answer will look like this. Yes, let me explain a microservice design with a very popular service, application load balancer. So application load balancer can be associated with Amazon Route 53, and with Amazon Route 53, you could have a proper DNS name. For example, www.store.com. Any traffic going to this domain will be forwarded it to this application load balancer. Now, based on the URL path, this application load balancer can do path-based routing and send the traffic to different target groups. For example, with store.com/browse, it can send the traffic to a target group, which is an Amazon EC2 in an auto-scaling group. And this becomes one microservice. And for these EC2s, I could have, let's say, Amazon DynamoDB, which is AWS's flagship NoSQL database, as the storage. For store.com/purchase, I could send the traffic to another auto-scaling group with EC2s, but this is handling real-time transaction, which requires complex queries and joins. So for this, I'm going to use Amazon Aurora. And similarly, I could have different target groups for different paths. Now this design highlights some of the microservices strengths and characteristics. For example, each of the microservices is independent of each other and can be handled by separate teams. Often, even the tech stack is different. For example, store.com/browse can be handled by EC2s in auto-scaling group, whereas store.com/purchase could be handled by containers running in Kubernetes. Store.com return could be handled by Lambda. Not only these microservices can be independently scaled, tested, and deployed because they are all independent of each other, the compute as well as the storage. This also demonstrates a powerful feature of microservice, which is polyglot. Because different teams are handling these different microservices, they could be written in different programming languages. For example, store.com/browse backend could be written in Python. The container ones could be written in Node.js, and the Lambda could be written in Go. This is how I will design a microservice in AWS, which demonstrates the microservice characteristics as well as superpowers of some of these AWS services. Now, a popular follow-up to this question is, how will you pick one service versus another? Like in the previous example, you mentioned EC2, you mentioned containers, you mentioned Lambda, right? That's a really popular follow-up for cloud interviews, especially for solutions architect. So you can ask interviewer about the system requirements, right? What are the design requirements of the system to show a little bit more depth? And you just have to study for this one, right? There are many different questions. Why should you use load balancer? Why not API gateway or vice versa? SQL versus NoSQL, etc. So this is my favorite subject because as a solutions architect, this comes up a lot in my customer conversations, and I have a bunch of videos on this. So check them out. I will give the playlist link in the description. Okay, next one. What is your favorite service? So that's a popular one, and a lot of you know the answer to this. The one that you get stumbled on is, how can you improve it? Or have you faced any challenges with it? This is what shows the interviewer that you actually know this service or you have actually used it. Pick something you know. Do not try to show off, okay? A lot of you think the stuff that you do not know, if you mention it, then that makes you better or that impresses the interviewer. What impresses the interviewer is if you can demonstrate depth in these questions. For example, I asked a candidate, what is your favorite service? The candidate goes, Elastic Kubernetes service, right? I thought, okay, great. Can you tell me why is it your favorite? Or can you tell me how can you scale Kubernetes workload? And the candidate could not answer. I can only judge you based on the questions you answer. So do not think that you always have to give the name of the most cutting edge service that you do not know as an answer. That is not the intention of this question. Okay, with that, let's go through some popular services. Okay, when we ask you how can you improve it or have you faced any challenge, mention one challenge that you have fixed and another that requires intense workaround or no solutions exist, right? So it covers both. So one shows you have faced challenges, so you have worked with it and you know how to fix it. The other one, you wish it's improved. For example, EC2. So you could say AMI rehydration is a challenge. Every time there's a new security vulnerability, you have to get the patch, you have to rehydrate it. So then you can talk about how have you automated that process. You could use EC2 image builder, CICD pipeline. Another challenge is selecting proper instance types. There's over 800 EC2 instances available. How would you know what EC2 instance you should select for your workload? So in that case, you could say, we faced this challenge and then we found out there's a relatively newer service called Compute Optimizer, which can analyze your last few weeks of utilization and then based on that runs machine learning and then recommends you the proper instance type. And one of the things you could say that could be done more, you can relate to the shared responsibility model. And you could say, look, EC2 has a lot of superpower. However, at the end of the day, we as the customer are responsible for the AMIs and rehydration and all that stuff. Wish there was an easy button for all of it where you do not have to orchestrate some of it. Now let's go to another popular one, Lambda. You could say selecting memory is difficult because Lambda selects up to 10 gigabytes of memory. You did not know how much memory your application should require. How did you overcome this challenge? You used Lambda Insights. Lambda Insights shows utilization of the memory versus allocated memory. Based on that, you optimized it. What is the one thing you wish Lambda had? Maybe running beyond 15 minutes. You love Lambda and you want to run everything in Lambda. However, currently you cannot process your long-running batch in Lambda without extreme overhead with checkpointing and all that stuff. So you wish you could run Lambda beyond 15 minutes. How about one of the database, RDS? You could say one challenge you faced was the cost was very high. And then how did you fix it? You used reserved instances. So not many people know this. People always think reserved instances are just for your regular EC2s. However, reserved instances are applicable for regular RDS as well. So what is reserved instances? Reserved instances is in return of you committing to use this instance for 1 or 3 years, you enjoy up to 72% discount, which is pretty significant. Scaling writer instances is hard, right? So you have to do vertical scaling, you have to fall over, and before that, you have to implement sharding, this, that, whereas in NoSQL, it takes care of this scaling automatically, so you wish there is an easier way to do that. Finally, a popular interview question is what is service X? So X could be Lambda, S3, etc. A lot of you, when is asked what is Lambda, you just try to explain it, but then the problem is because you don't have the official definition, you go back and forth, like it's not succinct. So this is what I do. I always remember the official definition, then you can add your own words and explain it. For example, I'll just give you one example like Lambda. If the interviewer asks, what is AWS Lambda? AWS Lambda is a serverless compute service that lets you run code without provisioning or managing any servers, right? Then you can explore. Lambda has some of the other superpowers, such as it's pay as you go, it scales automatically, da, da, da. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions on any of these questions that I went over, or let me know if there are any other questions that you want me to go over. If you found this video helpful, please click that like button, smash it if that's something you are into, and subscribe. That's it for this one. I'll see you guys and girls in the next one. Bye.